6 disturbing facts about ancient Japan that will change how you see this culture. Scattered across Japan, you'll find castles built hundreds of years ago during the Warring States period. Today, many of these historic sites are popular tourist attractions visited by thousands. But did you know some of these castles hold a dark secret most people never learn about? Hitobashira, or human pillar, was a practice of burying people alive inside building foundations. The idea was that these sacrifices would appease the gods and ward off evil spirits. The sacrificed spirit would protect the castle from floods, earthquakes, and enemy attacks. Imagine being chosen. Eternal overtime work, protecting a castle with absolutely no pay. The most documented case of Hitobashira comes from Maruoka Castle, still standing in Sakai City. During construction, one of the castle walls kept collapsing. The builders were desperate for a solution. Instead of consulting a structural engineer, the builders decided a human sacrifice was the answer. They chose a poor one-eyed woman named Oshizu to be sacrificed inside the castle wall. Oshizu agreed, but only under one condition: make one of her children a samurai. The Lord agreed to her condition, and the tragic ritual was set in motion. Oshizu stood in position as stones were slowly piled around her body. She was crushed to death, leaving her 2 small children standing alone behind her. Astonishingly, construction then succeeded, and the castle was completed in 1576. Oshizu could rest knowing at least one of her sons would become a samurai. But the lord who made the promise was soon transferred to another province, breaking his word. Oshizu's children were left behind as orphans, the promise forever unkept. Legend says every spring, Oshizu's tears make the moat overflow with the rains. To this day, locals say you can hear a woman crying near the castle in the heaviest rain. Fact 2. If you thought composting your garden was intense, it has nothing on Shimo. You're a farmer in Edo, Japan. Your crops need fertilizer. No Home Depot for 200 years. So farmers in ancient Japan used human feces and urine as fertilizer for their crops. A 1697 agricultural compendium stated the superior farmer values Shimo as he values gold. Farmers around Edo, now modern Tokyo, were the biggest users of Shimo to feed the growing city. The best source was landlords in Edo who owned apartment buildings called nagaya. All residents shared a public toilet, so farmers could collect everything they needed in one stop. The landlords loved it. Selling their tenants' waste was an easy and very profitable side hustle.
For some landlords, selling waste was actually more profitable than the rent they collected.
They were literally turning waste into gold, one bucket at a time. Like all hot commodities, Shimo came in different grades, and premium quality was the most prized. The highest quality came from the homes of lords, who ate the finest food available. Lords produced premium Shimo, which grew premium crops, which fed back to the lords. A perfect cycle. You are what you eat, and in Edo, Japan, this phrase had a very literal meaning. Surprisingly, this system made Edo one of the most sanitary pre-industrial cities in the world. European cities of the same era dumped waste into waterways, causing epidemics of disease. Because farmers couldn't get enough Shimo, Edo's waterways stayed pristine and fresh. But for the farmers using Shimo, there were some pretty horrible downsides to deal with daily. Can you imagine the smell of working in those fields every single day of your life? Then there's the health side. Parasites, bacteria. The farmers and food were covered in it. Farmers used Shimo until the 1920s, when commercial fertilizer finally replaced it. Landlords then had to pay someone to remove waste from their buildings. A shocking reversal. Fact 3. If you think Japanese culture is weird now, it was always that way. He-gassen, which translates to fart battle, was a collection of scrolls from the 1600s. The scrolls depicted increasingly epic scenes of people having all-out fart battles. One scene shows two men using their farts to launch an old man into the air. Another man fires back, using his fart to launch a cat directly at them. Another scene shows a sneak attack, a man farting through a wall to ambush two people hiding. One shows a gang turf war. One side figures out they can use fans to deflect enemy farts. And two naked women fart together to defeat what looks like an oppressive lord. Some say these scrolls were social commentary on Western intrusion into Japan. But come on, look at these things. That is almost certainly not what is going on here. Fact 4. We often think of samurai as stoic sword masters with a strict code of honor. The samurai did follow the strict code of Bushido, but they also had some very other practices. The samurai also practiced Shudo, not a martial art, but the art of loving young boys. The samurai also practiced Shudo, not a martial art, but the art of loving young boys. These young apprentices, called wakashu, were usually around 10 or 11 years old. The samurai would teach them swordsmanship, discipline, and martial arts techniques. If the boy agreed, the relationship was formalized in a written brotherhood contract. The contract demanded extreme loyalty from both the samurai and his apprentice, even to the death. Interestingly, monogamy only applied to men. Both could still engage with women freely. The sexual relationship was said to end when the boy became an adult. Masters and apprentices stayed friends. The thrill was probably gone when the apprentice got a mustache and a very deep voice. Today, this would land you in prison. But in ancient Japan, Shudo was a normal step to samurai life. In fact, all the greatest samurai you've heard of had wakashu apprentices of their own. Oda Nobunaga, the first great unifier of Japan, had a wakashu named Mori Ranmaru. The man called the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven was also giggling with his underage apprentice. Hard to believe, but it's completely true. Ancient samurai culture was far more complex than legend. Fact 5. When you hear Buddhist, you think peaceful monks meditating in nature, right? But in ancient Japan, Buddhists of the 1500s were a completely different animal altogether. First, Japanese Buddhists in the 1500s also practiced Shudo with their young acolytes. A 17th century Buddhist scholar actually wrote in defense of these relationships. He wrote, "Even mountain dwellers who cut brush have learned to enjoy the shade of young saplings." But these Buddhists were also fierce warriors who fought samurai and other Buddhists. What began as protests over emperor favoritism escalated into full Buddhist-on-Buddhist combat. These warrior monks began attacking and burning down each other's temples with ferocity. They then turned on samurai, attacking them with long spears called naginata. They were known as fearless warriors who fought to the death, skilled with bows and swords too. But by far the most insane thing these monks did was a practice called Sokushinbutsu. Sokushinbutsu was a process of self-mummification. Monks tried to achieve enlightenment through ritual death. The goal was to slowly go from living to not living, leaving behind a corpse that would not decay. If your dead body wasn't rotting, you were considered enlightened and displayed as a new Buddha. The process began with a diet called mokujiki, or tree eating, for 1,000 days. For 1,000 days, the monk ate only pine needles, tree resin, and seeds. Nothing else. This extreme diet stripped his body of all fat, muscle, and bacteria to prepare him for death. Next, the monk stopped eating entirely, surviving only on tiny sips of salted water for 100 days. Throughout this entire period, the monk sat in unbroken, intense, focused meditation. When death felt near, disciples lowered the monk into a pine box 9 feet underground.
A small bamboo airway was inserted, and then the monk was buried alive in total darkness. The monk meditated underground and rang a bell periodically to signal he was still alive.
When the bell stopped ringing, disciples dug him up to check if the monk had passed. The airway was removed and the monk was sealed underground again for a further 1,000 days. After another 1,000 days, disciples checked the monk one final time for signs of decay.
If the body showed no decay, the monk had achieved enlightenment and was put on display.
He would be placed on display as a living, or well, not so living Buddha in the temple. There are still temples in northern Japan that display the mummified remains of successful monks today. Sokushinbutsu was made illegal in 1879. But one final monk attempted it anyway, in 1903. A monk named Bukai attempted Sokushinbutsu illegally in 1903, defying the ban entirely. But his disciples, fearing criminal association, never performed the final step to check on him. Bukai was left underground for almost 60 years, forgotten beneath the temple grounds. He was finally discovered by researchers in 1961, who stumbled upon the burial site by chance. To their shock, Bukai's body was perfectly mummified and completely well preserved after 60 years. So I guess Bukai made it to enlightenment after all, even if nobody was there to witness it. 6 deeply disturbing facts from ancient Japan. History is never as simple as it seems. The castle walls tourists visit today may still hold the bones of sacrificed souls inside them. And the economy of Edo ran partly on human waste, turning filth into a thriving commodity. The He-gassen scrolls remind us that humor in ancient Japan was absolutely unhinged. The samurai were not just warriors. Their lives were layered with complex and troubling traditions. Buddhist warriors prove that even the most peaceful tradition can become a weapon in the right hands. And somewhere in northern Japan, ancient mummified monks still sit in temples, watching silently. And somewhere in northern Japan, ancient mummified monks still sit in temples, watching silently. Ancient Japan was never simple, never clean, and never what the history books suggest it was. Imagine being chosen as a Hitobashira, crushed alive so a building could stand forever. A mother's final wish, betrayed by a lord who rode away and never looked back. Every spring the rains return, and if you listen closely, you might hear Oshizu crying still. And every time you enjoy a Japanese meal, remember who fertilized those ancient crops. He-gassen. Fart battles. Painted by an artist in the 1600s for reasons we will never fully understand. He-gassen. Fart battles. Painted by an artist in the 1600s for reasons we will never fully understand.
Shudo shaped the samurai world for centuries, accepted and expected by an entire warrior culture. The Buddhist warrior monks embody one of history's greatest contradictions: peace through violence. The Buddhist warrior monks embody one of history's greatest contradictions: peace through violence. Bukai sat alone underground for 60 years in perfect silence, and still made it to enlightenment.
No disciples came. No ceremony was performed. He lay forgotten until researchers found him.
The researchers who found him were not ready for what waited inside that underground chamber.
A perfect mummy, preserved without chemicals, without help, just willpower and 60 years alone.
Ancient Japan was a world of sacrifice, recycling, art, honor, violence, and the truly bizarre. Today, tourists walk across the very ground where all of this happened, without a clue.
But somewhere in the castle walls, a one-eyed woman still waits, still working, no overtime pay.
6 disturbing facts. Ancient Japan, a place where history is stranger than any fiction ever could be.